Saint Germaine, patron for child abuse, her story of hope. Saint Germaine Cousins was born in the year 1579 in a little village of France called Pibrac. Her father was Laurent Cousin and her mother Marie Laroche. She was born with a right hand that was deformed and paralyzed. Her mother died when she was very young, and her father remarried. When her stepmother Armande arrived on the Cousins' farm, Germaine was 4 or 5 and beginning to manifest signs of deformity and disease. She suffered with scrofula. To the selfish Armande, Germaine became a source of resentment. Germaine was unwanted, handicapped, abused, and neglected. To her stepmother, she was everything she despised. Germaine's father pretended not to notice the abuse, even when her stepmother left her in a drain and forgot about her for 3 days. He didn't even interfere when his wife poured boiling water on her legs. Germaine was given the barn as her living quarters. She was not allowed into the house, lest she contaminate the other members of the family. Clothed in the meanest of rags and with her feet always bare, she was poor, lonely, and hungry. Germaine was treated with less affection than the family dog. She was fed on scraps. The only warmth Germaine had on frozen winter nights was the woolly sheep that slept there too. Instead of being lonely, she found a friend in God. No cruelty, however atrocious, was beyond the stepmother's ability. The little girl was frequently covered with bruises and welts from a woman filled with hate. Nothing Germaine did, however hard she tried, would please her stepmother, who found one excuse after another to vent her inhumane rage upon Germaine. With this kind of treatment, it's no surprise that Germaine became even more ill. At the age of 9, Germaine's job was shepherding the family flock of sheep, where she spent much time praying. She prayed on a rosary made with knots on a string. Her simple little prayer was, "Dear God, please don't let me be too hungry or too thirsty. Help me to please my mother and help me to please you." Out of that simple faith grew a profound holiness and deep trust in God. Saint Germaine is one of the many examples of saints who have surmounted the obstacles of life and soared to the heights of holiness. Every week, Germaine was allowed to leave the little farm and attend Mass across the river in the village church of Sainte Marie Magdalene. She eagerly listened to every word of the sermon and the catechetical instructions given after Mass for the village children. An irresistible yearning to attend Mass daily inspired her to leave her sheep. One day, feeling so ardent a desire to attend the holy sacrifice, she called her sheep together and planted her spindle in the ground next to them. Then, making the sign of the cross, she ran to church. Germaine was overjoyed when she returned to discover her sheep were quietly resting about the distaff and under the shade of an oak tree. She began to repeat the same practice. She never lost a sheep or lamb. Many times neighbors would be mystified, finding Germaine's flock huddled obediently around her distaff. The village children were greatly attracted to her and eagerly sought her companionship. Germaine loved to talk to them about God and the faith. On another occasion, when the local river was in flood, the young shepherdess, anxious to be on time for Mass, made the sign of the cross, and to the astonishment of the onlookers on the other side, the waters parted, leaving a dry path for her to cross, just like the parting of the Red Sea in the Old Testament. Germaine had found another outlet for her charity in the numerous beggars who had discovered her kindness and compassion for their trials. It is difficult to imagine one more destitute than Germaine herself, and yet the beggars came to her almost every day for sympathy and to have her share with them her scraps of bread. One very cold winter day, Germaine had gone into the kitchen to pick up some scraps for her hungry friends, when she was caught by her stepmother, who noticed Germaine was carrying something in her apron. The angry woman imagined it to be a supply of bread. Picking up a stick, she began chasing Germaine to the village green, hoping to prove to all that Germaine was a thief and to put her in disgrace. With the stick waving above the head of Germaine, Madame Cousin demanded that she open her apron in view of the large crowd that had gathered. The trembling girl did as she was told, and a cascade of flowers unknown in the region tumbled to the ground. Where had she found the vibrant blossoms in the middle of the ice and snow? There was only one answer, and Germaine gave it herself, when she handed a flower to her mother and said, "Please accept this flower, mother. God sends it to you in sign of his forgiveness." Germaine was invited back into the house. Germaine explained, however, that she was perfectly content in her environment. In fact, she offered all her little sacrifices to God and prayed for those who hurt her. In suffering and solitude, she was not lonely. She found a friend in God. She would not now abandon him for the comforts of man. Despite her insistence on remaining where she was, things did begin to change. Her years of prayers and sacrifices began to visibly affect the stepmother. Armande, however, did not have much time to make up to Germaine for all her years of abuse. Saint Germaine's life was coming to an end. Her physical maladies had taken their toll, undermining what little strength she had left. Germaine continued to hope and trust in God in all her suffering. She offered all to God. On the night that she died, celestial lights were seen above the area where she lived. In the morning, the villagers realized Germaine had died. Running to the Cousin farm, they found Germaine lifeless. Her angelic countenance struck them with piety and devotion. This beautiful saint was scarcely 22 years of age. News of Germaine's death spread quickly throughout the village, and soon the Cousin farm was besieged with mourners. Her faithful friends, the children, had gathered wild carnations and stalks of rye to make a wreath for her head. Her stepmother, Madame Cousin, dressed the poorly clad and undernourished body in a beautiful dress, the like of which Germaine had never worn in her life, and placed a candle in her hands. Germaine died on June 15th, 1601. Germaine's body was interred in the village church where she loved to pray, it being the only place on earth where she had ever truly felt at home. In 1644, 43 years after her death, her body was found to be perfectly preserved and pliable. At her beatification process, the documents attested more than 400 miracles or extraordinary graces, and 30 postulatory letters from archbishops and bishops in France besought the beatification from the Holy See. The miracles attested were cures of every kind, of blindness, congenital and resulting from disease, of hip and spinal disease, besides the multiplication of food for the distressed community of the Good Shepherd at Bourges in 1845. Saint Germaine was canonized a saint on June 29, 1867, by Pope Pius IX. The Saint Germaine healing oil is now available at ablessedcalltolove.com.